Yeah.
Right, you start now.
Good morning. Our guest speaker this morning, Allana, thank you very much for coming to see us this morning. Hers is a story of a tremendous courage of overcoming adversity and an inspiration to many Australians. It's a story that she should tell, and there's no reason for me to introduce her except to say this is an exceptional story from an exceptional lady. It's contained in this book here, and we've got copies over there, and Allana will tell you how you can get hold of them. So please join me in welcoming Allana, an exceptional Australian. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael, and thank you for the invitation, everybody, to be here. Gosh, I thought I'd just basically share my story with you this morning, and I've got a lot to say, so it's going to move pretty quick. Are you ready to keep up? Say yes?
Yes.
Thank goodness, this one, at least one. When I was about 5 years old, my father was building a big concrete slab in our backyard, and I went around to all the neighbours and my friends and told them that my dad was building me a helipad, and that I was going to have a purple helicopter and I was going to land this thing on my helipad. But even as a 5-year-old, I truly believed this was what was going to happen. But all my friends and family, they teased me and said this was never going to happen and you're just making it up. So I was really, really upset about that. But I was even more upset when my dad put a carport up over my helipad. So that was sort of the first memory I have of an interest in aviation. My actual career didn't begin until some years later. I was 18 and my mum's birthday was coming up, so I bought her a ride in a hot air balloon. And I went along with her that morning just as a bit of support while she did the flight. And I don't know if you've had, I'm sure we've all had a moment in our lives that changes us forever. Well, this morning was the pivotal moment for me, and I was suddenly introduced to something and people who were doing the most extraordinary things. I'd sort of had a fairly sheltered life. I was a legal secretary at the time, and I'd really never done anything adventurous. And even though I didn't fly that morning, the whole balloon thing and atmosphere and the people who were involved captured my imagination. Within 2 weeks, I quit my job and I was working for the hot air ballooning company. Now, I don't know if it was the romantic lure of the actual balloon itself or the romantic lure of a young guy named Laurie, who was one of the crew on the balloon. My mother will tell you it was definitely Laurie. But like I said, within 2 weeks, I was working for the hot air ballooning company, and Laurie was also a fixed wing pilot, and he took me flying. And I was hooked, so I started taking flying lessons. He was also a skydiver, and he introduced me to that sport, so I suddenly started jumping out of planes. So from going from a legal secretary, having not done very much, all of a sudden aviation became an all-consuming passion for me. I got my pilot's licence, and a couple of years later, again, my life was to change completely. It was the 22nd of December 1990, and I was driving along in my car, and I heard the reports on the radio talking about an aeroplane that had gone out on a training flight, but it hadn't come back. And it had actually taken off from Camden Airport, and that was the same airport where I had done my flight training. So throughout the day I was listening, hoping and praying that the people who were missing had been found. But as night fell, they hadn't been found. So I was asked by the coordinators of the search and rescue that was in progress if I would go along the next day to help out. They just wanted local pilots with local knowledge. So headed off the next day with my flying kit. I was allocated to be an observer on a flight that left at about 11 o'clock in the morning. There were 6 of us on board. I was in the back left-hand seat. And the idea was basically, we had a map, and there was a big area sort of marked on our map, and that was our area to search. And we were basically just fly a zigzag pattern over this area, looking down to see if we could see any sort of like broken branches in the tops of trees or any sort of thing glistening in the sun or anything that didn't look right. So we took off, and I remember that day it was about 40 degrees in the shade. It was a very hot day. We took off and we started flying our zigzag pattern, and I remember looking down through the trees and realising that the canopy below was so thick that the people we were looking for could be right below us, and we may not be able to see them through the canopy of the trees, and it was so frustrating. And I remember all 6 of us on board were so committed to doing what we could to try and find these people. Well, we'd been in the air for about 40 minutes. And then all of a sudden, there was this huge explosion, the biggest bang I could ever imagine. And I don't know, I didn't know what had happened at first. I kind of thought we must have had a bird strike or hit something, because that's kind of what it felt like. But pretty much straight away, the whole aeroplane just started to shake so violently, and I knew then that we'd had some sort of catastrophic engine failure, which is what had happened. And we were over the worst terrain that you could imagine for anything to ever go wrong. There was nothing below us but trees. So the next 3 minutes, was quite surreal, really. I was in denial about what was happening. In fact, you know what people often ask me? They say, what were you thinking during those 3 minutes? And I was thinking, I haven't finished my Christmas shopping. Which is really irrational, but that was my thought at the time. On impact, the first thing I remember hearing was the wings hitting the trees, and it was just like this high-pitched screech. And then it felt like we were being tumbled over and over and over. And then everything just fell silent. I was aware of the pain straight away, and instinctively, I was kind of sort of slumped over the person next to me, and instinctively I went to sit myself up, and as I did so, I realised that I'd broken my back. There was, everybody else was unconscious. In fact, there were 2 head deceased and 2 deceased about 10 minutes later. There was one other survivor who was sitting next to me, but he was unconscious. But I assumed that everybody had died. So as I sat there in the middle of the Blue Mountains, at 40 degrees in the shade, I realised that I was extremely severely injured. Instinctively I tried to sort of see if I could wiggle to get out of the wreckage, but I was pinned in completely because the seat that was in front of me had come off its tracks on impact and it was pushed hard up against my knees, so there was no way I was going to be able to get out. I also suddenly became aware that there was fuel that I could smell because we'd ruptured the fuel tank, and so I started to panic because I realised if we were going to, we could easily catch on fire, and if that was going to happen, that I was just going to sit there and have to burn alive. And that was a reality. Through the heat and the stress and the pain, every now and again I started to pass out, and I remember just saying to myself, you have to stay awake, you have to stay awake. So I fought every time that happened, and when that happened I thought I was dying. That was what I thought was going on, and so I was fighting just to stay awake. Anyway, as I sat there, it was the most profound experience because I truly believed that I was going to die out there in the middle of nowhere. And I was only 23 at the time, and I sort of kind of thought, well, that was quick. And you know what? When you're faced with that, and that was what I was facing. What's really, really important to you becomes crystal clear. And for me, it wasn't what sort of car I was driving, how much money I was earning, and I certainly wasn't sitting there thinking, gee, I wish I got to go to work just one more day. I wasn't thinking any of those things, but you know, it was all about the people. It was all about my family, and I remember thinking about all the things I wish I had taken the time to say to them. And it was such a regret, such a regret. And I also looked at the 23 years of my life, and I realised I'd never done anything significant to impact anybody's life at all. And I'd left nothing behind, nothing at all, not my children, nothing. And I felt like I'd wasted the most precious gift that I had, and that was life. So I prayed to God so hard, and I said, please give me another chance. And if I have a chance to live, I don't care what sort of disability I have, whatever I have to deal with, I promise that I'll live a better life. So I was very lucky that the aircraft that we were in was fitted with an emergency location transmitter, and this is triggered on impact, and as long as an aircraft has got a homing device on it that's able to pick up on the signal, they can find you pretty quick. We were lucky that the Channel 9 helicopter that was in the area had such a homing device, so we were found within about 15 minutes. And remembering also that there was a full-scale search and rescue in the area anyway, looking for the other aircraft. There are about 12 other search aircraft in the area, so once we were found, it was like a swarm. We had every emergency service that was in the area there with us. So within 15 minutes, everybody was starting to arrive. It took them 3.5 hours to cut me free of the wreckage, and then I was taken to Prince Henry Hospital, which was at the time the main spinal unit for Sydney. And I was taken into emergency, and this young doctor took over my care, and I was fairly frantic. I said to him, I've broken my back. He said, no, we're going to take good care of you, we're going to do a whole series of tests, and then we'll see what we have to deal with. And I said, no, you don't understand, I have broken my back. Anyway, so I went through a whole lot of x-rays and different tests, and later that evening I was taken back to the doctor who was caring for me, and he said, Allana, I have devastating news, you've broken your back. I'd worked that out already, but he said I'd done such a good job of it that right there and then I had to accept that I was never ever going to walk, and that my life was going to be as a person confined to a wheelchair. Now, I won't tell you what I said to him, it wasn't very nice, but I was really, really angry that somebody would write me off so quickly. And I was just so determined, I was like, I thought, you bugger, I'm going to show you, and that's not going to be my life. So one of the first things they had to do then was